Hi, everybody. Good morning. It's Erin Scott here. So, I'm here with my coffee. The chickadees are singing outside, and it's June 5th. It's the morning of our Sagittarius full moon lunar eclipse that's happening later today. Let me give you some of the stats for it. You can see here that this chart, let me pull up my highlighter here. You can see here that it's happening at the full moon point is happening at 3:12 p.m. Eastern Time US. The point of the lunar eclipse, the exact point is at 3:24 p.m. Eastern US, okay? So there's a couple things that I want to bring forward for you today. One is we're going to look at the symbology. One thing that I didn't pull up is the Mars placement, which I think I'm also going to look at. I pulled up the sun and the moon placement for the Sabian symbol. So let me just take a little sip of coffee here. So listen, we're in the middle of we've reached a tipping point, and now things are moving explosively in justice-oriented directions. That's what's happening here in the US, most certainly, with the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent riots, protests, and response from the collective. People have had enough. There's a tipping point that's been reached. And there's things happening in other parts of the world as well. But the US is really feeling it. And the interesting thing, everybody, about this particular time frame is that the US chart, so here we can see that the full moon, the sun opposed to the moon, is happening at 15 degrees 34 minutes. And these opposed points are also squaring exactly a 15-degree Mars, right? But if we look at where the moon is located at 15 degrees, and if we take a look at the US chart, you can, and this is a typically assessed US chart, you can see that the ascendant point here is very close to that moon point, 12 degrees 21 minutes Sagittarius. Indeed, there is an intensified process occurring. It has to do with the deeper bowels of the US. I mean, in this case, we're literally talking about the perspective and the approach to the process of how this country is run. That's what we're looking at with this 12-degree Sagittarius ascendant point. Progression, expansion, etc. So the eclipse is happening, impacting the kind of approach and perspective of the entity called the United States of America. That's a pretty big deal. The other thing that I'm going to point out, I'm not going to do a full analysis here. First of all, this isn't even my chart. I pulled this up from, the records online. I would pull up more to this particular chart. I would pull it up a little bit differently. But what I will point out is this. You're going to notice that in this chart for, let's say, the entity called the United States of America, look at where the North Node is located. It's located in Leo in the 8th house. The polar opposed point, which isn't shown here, is the South Node. Now, the North Node is what? It's at about 8 degrees here. Let's see what it is. It's at 7:35. So 7 degrees 35 minutes Leo. That's the North Node. 7 degrees 35 Aquarius is the South Node. So the patterning of the country is based on the rebel. It's based on the need for freedom. It's based on a trauma signature. It's based on a certain need for detachment. And it's in the second house of self-value. So valuing the rebellious action, which certainly is the case for the emergence of this country, right? Well, look at where the growth arc is. Look at what the new patterning of the US is, everybody. It's in Leo, 8th house. This has to do with literally the growth arc moving into a place of confidence and creative expression. Keep in mind, this is influencing inherently the collective that lives here, the demographic, the people that are nationals here, the people that live here, the people that are associated with this country that call it home. This kind of lives at a level of our substrate here, right? Because the place is part of who we are too. And so this has a place in our story. But with regards to the North Node in Leo, there is the growth of moving away from many things, including trauma signature orientation. And by the way, including a more detached way of operating, because this can be the patterning here. To be very, I mean, let's get real, everybody. Many, many archetypal quality sets to Aquarius and Uranus. And you can see that Uranus here in the US chart is in Gemini. So there's a certain way by which the mind functions, the mind of the entity of the US. And that includes the political leadership that we have undergone over the centuries. Okay. So there's a certain way by which the mind functions and operates, and there's a certain way that things are communicated from the political leadership of this country. There's a trauma signature imbued there. There's also the kind of, let's say, the inherent drive to evolve. So there's this kind of functionality to evolve, but to do so in a detached way. It is natural to the functionality of Uranus. People talk about Uranus as if it's the humanitarian. Well, it is, because it naturally rules the evolutionary process of humanity. And it does see things from this detached view of the collective. The deep past, the refined future, everything in between, that's the perspective of this deep space planet. So it's a removed, detached, emotionally cold, naturally, way of operating. It can be cruel. It depends on what iteration this energetic is operating in, but it can be quite cruel. And it can also become the refined humanitarian. It depends, right? But the way the mind functions in this entity of the country and the way the communications occur can be very kind of erratic and inconsistent, and it can play out in certain levels of kind of tapping back into a trauma signature, which indeed is the patterning of the country's blueprint. The growth edge is creative self-expression, and eighth house, transformation. Death and rebirth is encoded in the evolutionary process of this country. Death and rebirth, deep transformation, tapping into the psychological underpinnings and the deep dark past. And and that is precisely what's happening now. I would say that George Floyd was actually the tipping point. I think some people thought of the Michael Brown incident several years ago as the tipping point. I don't think so. I think this is the tipping point. This was the flashpoint. This particular event was enough. It was the straw on the camel's back. The deep transformation is called forward. So we can talk more about that another time. Let's pull this down. So if we're talking about this particular full moon and an eclipse where the moon's reflective light from the sun gets blocked, that, well, it speaks to several things. There's several potentials here. There literally is a potential for a woman, a teacher, a leader, somebody who has a voice on the collective stage. Whenever we have a full moon eclipse, there's a potential for things to be eclipsed out. There's a potential for aspects of the past to be eclipsed out. It's possible for a woman in your life to be eclipsed out, whether that be from a death or from a severing of a relationship or something to that effect. There can also be an emotionally held belief system, an emotionally held philosophy of life, construct of reality that gets eclipsed out. Sagittarius. And because this is happening on, again, a lot of you are watching from other countries, but I'm sure a lot of the view from all of you around the world are actually at least slightly tuned into what's happening in the US, because it is pretty dramatic and it is kind of part and parcel to this unfolding story that we're all living through. But indeed, I think with the eclipse happening on the US ascendant point, it does speak to a certain way of approaching actions, a certain way of approaching the running of the country that will be eclipsed out, that is being eclipsed out. And of course, when we're talking about an eclipse, we're talking about kind of a 6 month process, at least a 6 month process. So for now, and certainly within the month ahead, but even within the next 6 month cycle until the next eclipse season happening around the winter solstice, which is going to be the point of this great conjunction, this Jupiter Saturn toroidal force, expansion, contraction, toroidal force energetic coming together at 0 degrees Aquarius. This is going to be right now. You can see that Saturn is at 1 degrees Aquarius. Saturn is going retrograde, then it's going to go back forward to 0 degrees where it's going to meet Jupiter. So these two meeting, these two energetics, expansion and contraction coming together, is drastic. And it's happening in the sign of the collective of humanity. And it's happening at 0 degrees, which is a potential, it's literally a new cycle. The 0 degree point, new beginnings, new story, new chapter. It is the new paradigm, right? So up here, we're being prepped at this eclipse season for some sort of perspective, some sort of way by which this country approaches justice and truth that is being eclipsed out. This is a good thing. This is a beneficial thing. There is a demand by the people here. The thing is, the moon opposed to the sun, whenever we have the solar expression of the self, which is the more externalized aspect of self, with the more internalized aspect of self, there is this back and forth. There is this external over here, the internal over here. And how do we navigate that? So that's natural to any kind of polar opposition that we have in our natal chart. You know, it's just the energetic, it's natural. And every month we have a full moon. Every month there's some navigation that we're doing here. So the inner wants truth and justice. The collective inner self wants truth and justice. The externalized self is speaking Gemini from its value system. So the external self is speaking value. This is what matters to me. This is what I value. This is what needs to happen here. This is the ethic that needs to be spoken. So justice is spurring this external expression. And what we have here with this exact square at 15 degrees, 15, 15, and 15, this is an exact midpoint to the archetypal journey here, which I have to say symbolically is quite fascinating when you think about it. Why? Because 15 represents kind of let's say, if you're imagining a teeter-totter, you know, and somebody is rocking, two children, let's say, on each side of the teeter-totter, it's moving back and forth, up and down, and that fulcrum point is 15. It is the midpoint. It's the thing that's halfway in the archetypal journey of growth and evolution within this archetypal story. And so what do we have here? 15 degrees Cancer. Let me pull this up again. Yeah, I mean, look at this. Look at the solar placement for the US, everybody. What is it at? It's at 13 degrees. Literally, you can't make this stuff up. The sun for the US at 13 degrees Cancer. Cancer. So, here we go. Here we have the perception the perspective, the approach, the driver to the entity of the US, squaring Mars in this case, but which is the natal sun in the chart of the US, opposing let's look at Gemini. And Gemini, we have Mars here. You know, we have Uranus about what, 9 degrees, and we have Mars about 21 degrees. So, right in between Mars and Uranus, this kind of action of the rebel, a bit emotionally detached action set when it comes to, the way by which we operate, think, communicate. So, indeed, Mars is implicated here too, really, especially with Venus here, Venus at 12. So again, the US's Uranus is here and the Mars is here, and these live right in between. So, quite literally, this is impacting the US and the process happening now in a very, very direct way. What I haven't pulled up is the POTUS's chart, which I'm not going to do now, but he also has Gemini signatures. So there's stuff here with that as well, you know. The inner need, the inner exacerbated need for truth and justice is pushing back and exacerbating the people's voice emerging. And what's happening with this square, everybody, is that Mars in Pisces is pursuing ideal results. It's pursuing ideal action sets that is based on love and compassion, global compassion, compassion for everything, every living entity. And Mars in Pisces also is energized for a cause. So there's energy to put forward for compassionate results, ideal results with regards to a cause, right? So this 15, 15, 15, this fulcrum point, this midpoint in the story of growth and evolution in Pisces, in the story of evolution in Sag, in the story and evolution of Gemini, the truths, the communications, and the compassion. We have more to go. But the midpoint for me indicates a tipping point, and it represents a fulcrum point between past and future, between old ways of operating and new ways of operating. It's very dynamic. Okay, beauties, let's take a look at some of the symbology. Now, we're going to look here, okay? In fact, I'm going to remove my highlighter right now so you can just look at the arrow here. But what we have here is the sun's location. Look at the symbology here. So between 15 and 16 degrees, the solar location in Gemini with Venus, speaking values. A woman suffragist haranguing. This is a symbol of the soul's demand for a full participation in the responsibilities of human society and of the realization that the values of life are maintained only as there is a mutual give and take in respect to real difference in point of view. There is here the necessity for substantiating right with a reasoned conviction and for enlarging the privileges of human through a broad extension of all common or community functions. The key word is indignation. When positive, the degree is in unswerving determination to expand every potential of being and taking part in every possible detail of worldwide reconstruction. And when negative, a bias forever exalting itself. I want you all to feel into that. Why? Because, in fact, let me pull this over, pull this up. Because the thing is, you have to understand that this particular positioning is going to be manifested, it's going to be catalyzed, it's going to be energized different in different people. The people in charge, keep in mind that these particular signatures here are where that Uranus Mars are. Is that correct? Yeah, Uranus Mars in Gemini. So you have to understand that for the government, for example, for the US government and for the politicians, they are activated by um, Uranian action sets and communicating from that impetus. So, what that means is that those in charge, those that are connected to this government, and by the way, I'm focusing in on the US because of everything activated, but please understand, this is generally what I'm talking about throughout the planet. This is a worldwide activation that we're looking at here, okay? So, the thing is that some people are going to be communicating from a negative bias, which is forever exalting itself. Can we not all feel into the truth of that? That is, of course, what it would be for some. And then for others, when positive, the degree is an unswerving determination to expand every potential of being and take part in every possible detail of worldwide reconstruction. You can't make this stuff up. It's so meaningful. Now, if we go to the moon's position, 15 to 16 degrees Sag, listen to this. Seagulls watching a ship. This is a symbol of the spirit's demand for its full share in the privileges and rewards of human society, and of the individual's realization that his or her personal interests are served only as he or she maintains an unceasing vigilance on his or her own behalf. There is a continual and holy and personal give and take in every phase of life's overall economy. There is a continual and wholly impersonal give and take in every phase of life's overall economy. So that what loses its usefulness in one respect will gain an immediate high potentiality in another. Moreover, what human fails to claim indefinitely for him or herself is promptly surrendered to the devices of someone else. The key word is alertness. When positive, the degree is a gift for recognizing every opportunity at hand. And when negative, aimless expectation. Again, you can feel into the potential for some people are going to be activated in one way, some in another way. It depends on their blueprint. It depends on their level of awareness and their consciousness orientation and their willingness, all of it. It depends on who they are and what level of growth they're at. Now, I want to read something else here. These are fantastic. I mean, you can't get more aligned than this. Although I will say that I've been working with the symbols for years now, since 2014 or something. And they are pristinely on point always. They never fail. They just never fail. Now, one thing that I'm going to show you here, let's pull this back up, the highlighter. Okay, so we're going to look at the Mars here, okay? And I don't have the image of it, but I'm going to read it to you. So 15 to 16 Pisces. Okay, this is Mars, all right? An orangutan. This is a symbol of the primitive power which the processes of evolution have brought into leash with its development of humankind, and which each person must refine for his or her own use in meeting the demands of higher life. There are always unmobilized resources in self to meet the exigencies of any unique situation in which an individual may unwittingly be involved. And maturity at root is a continual discovery of these and a consequent increasing faculty for rising to any possible occasion. The keynote is dexterity. When positive, the degree is the human's ability to strip him or herself to fundamentals and there stand proudly on his or her own. And when negative, self justification, incrudity, or violence. Can you feel into that? When positive, when negative, you can feel into the expressions happening in one way or another. For some people, this driver for their kind of spiritual alignment is going to create violence, which we are already seeing. For those of you who are fully aware and have been watching the news and are staying awake and aware to all kinds of different developments occurring, there are many, many people who are wanting war. War. Individuals who have been stockpiling guns and watching video games, and they've just been chomping at the bit to have a real life playtime. So there's going to be lots of people um, who are going to, their actions are going to be stemmed from a place of delusion. Mars in Pisces, ruled by Neptune, especially the conjunction to Neptune too, this can be deluded actions, skewed actions, actions based on fantasy and self-delusion. So let's all be clear that yes, this is activated as well. For the mindful, intelligent, grounded, matured, evolved individual, this can look like grounded and discerned actions based on a real cause, with clarity to what the individual wounded narrative has to play in your actions. Your own stories is going to drive your own desire to create a result, right? But for those very awake and aware of what their blueprint is, who they are, what their stories are, and are able to discern what the collective good is, the right action for the collective movement and evolution needed now, this is huge. This can be beautiful action for the right cause. So, this T square is active, action oriented. T squares instigate action. The inner driver for truth, creating the communication, and driven by the idea for a cause in the best case scenario. Okay? I think that's all I'm going to talk about, everybody. I've already talked about some of the other signatures here in previous videos. So I'm going to leave it there. I send you all lots of love and support for today, for this month ahead, and indeed for this next 6-month cycle. We do have some astrological signatures that are coming up. Well, I mean now, but certainly in the fall that I'm going to talk more about because it's a very, very dynamic time. It really is paradigm shifting at the root. And you, each as individuals, according to your own blueprint and its natural unfolding process, are going through your own individual, personal changes and transformations that are appropriately meeting this moment, by the way. The unfolding of your story is completely correlated with this greater unfolding. So please understand that things are correct, they are aligned, and you are moving. Actually, some people are naturally by decision moving into alignment because there's awareness about their story. Other people will be, let's say, pushed or forced into alignment through conditions. It depends on how aware you are to your storyline, your blueprint. Okay. So, everybody, listen, for those of you who are born under the sign of Gemini, or for those who have mothers, fathers, or family members who are born under the sign of Gemini, there's a sale that I currently have activated through the majority of this month up until the sun moves into Cancer for a Gemini solar return analysis. So, for those interested, you can be in touch for that. The links are below the video. All right. Much love. Bye bye.